I've been obviously tracking this one relatively closely, so I've got lots of questions. I'm sure you'll have some questions too. First of all, if I can throw this one open to all of you, to what degree do any of you believe the tier and energy ratings published by data centre providers today, pre-NABERS?
I think PUE's, done a lot in the industry. If you look at the Australian averages, my back of the envelope statistics say the Australian data centre industry has improved by about 8% per annum in the last 4 or 5 years. So I think it is driving a behaviour. I think there's some pros and cons to PUE, and it's like anything, when people get better at it, they learn loopholes, they learn other ways to do it. I think this is another level now, NABERS. It's actually saying, are you getting the most out of your IT? What is the bang for buck you're getting from it? So PUE, you could have had lazy servers sitting there doing nothing, went into the rating, you took the consequences. The behaviour this will drive is to get utilisation and efficiency out of that. So I think that's a differentiator.
Just to add, I think if we go back a couple of years, some of the PUE statements being made in the marketplace were probably a little bit optimistic to what they really were, but I believe that's actually improved a lot with a lot of the data centre operators actually managing and monitoring exactly what's going on in their facilities. So some of those ratings we're seeing now are a lot more realistic and true to what the site is actually operating at. And as Glenn mentioned, a lot of that capabilities come back to organisations understanding what's happening with their IT and monitoring that.
Bob, what are some of the ways you've seen those metrics fudged in the past?
Well, one of the problems that we've seen with PUE measurements is how were they measured? And I've heard of all kinds of stories where somebody might switch over to bypass, somebody might do a spot measurement in the middle of winter time, and oh great, we've got a PUE of 1.2, isn't that fantastic? So there has been no uniformity because there's been no way to verify. So somebody puts up their hand and say, we got this great PUE, but how was it really measured? And for the first time, we now have a rating system under NABERS that will standardise that measure and actually compare apples to apples. So people can actually be assured that you're actually comparing one data centre to another with real apples to real apples, and there'll be no differentiation in the methodology behind the way the measures were carried out. And to me, that's a huge step forward.
Okay, and so some of the industry panellists, such as Greg and Glenn, were involved in a consultative capacity in developing this standard. Why did you guys feel the need to be involved from a host colo perspective to a end user perspective?
Primarily for us, it was something that we needed to be part of so that we could be across it. So for a long time, we had been encouraging people to come to our facility because of efficiencies gains that could be achieved. We work almost exclusively in the federal government space, and federal government was very, very keen to see this implemented. So we needed to make sure that we were across it, and also support the initiative, because as soon as the playing field is level and everyone's measured equally, then I think there'll be less sort of claims around design PUE and whatnot, and rather around the actual true NABERS rating, and it can't come quick enough for us.
Okay, and Glenn?
I guess for us I had two things. Our organisation, we might be NAB, but it has nothing to do with NABERS. But we were in on the pilot and that sort of thing of the original building ratings. We've been there for a long time. We use it in our lease negotiations, and we will not accept a long-term lease under 4.5 now. It has to be better than that, and our new buildings we're moving into are 5s and potentially a 6-star, or we're waiting for an assessment now. So we have used it a great deal. It's been productive for us. The people we lease buildings from, we have reduced rentals if those buildings don't hit those performance marks, other things like that. So we've been an active user of it. we're also a large data centre organisation, so it was a natural extension to get involved. I guess also too, I felt the industry had to step up here and have a voice at this table. It was quite clear that what was trying to be achieved was going to be world's best practice. So we had to sort of look at how was that going to correlate in the day-to-day, and I think that's where a lot of our energy on the technology side really focused, was to try to, how can we make this work practically? And these tools help deliver some of that knowledge gaps that we felt that would be difficult for people.
So Matthew, the chart that you put up was quite telling with regards to take-up of the office rating prior to regulation kicking in. Mm-hmm. There is an argument, and I hear a lot from our readers, that how will NABERS get teeth without it being mandated? When you look at the office experience and then you look at the data centre industry, I mean, are there parallels with regards to how aggressively you expect them to take this up?
Well, I think it might be. I guess we found that the office building market take-up was quite slow to begin with, but as more people became familiar with the market potential, the market benefit that those early adopters were getting, that we saw that rapid take-up. So yeah, it was market forces rather than the mandatory disclosure that really has driven the take-up of NABERS today. I guess what we would expect is that the take-up might be a bit more rapid with the data centres market, because we already have had that experience in the office building market. So people don't need to look just to their own peers to say, I can see that there is a potential market advantage for me as a data centre provider in getting a NABERS rating and actually achieving really high ratings. They can actually see that people in other sectors have already enjoyed that benefit. So I think that, yes, we'll still see the same thing of there will be market leaders that start doing NABERS data centre ratings now and start improving their performance, effectively immediately. But there will be growth year on year as well. I think that we'll see that it will be much more rapid than that. If you looked at the chart, it was quite a slow take-up for the first 5 or 6 years. Part of that was also us learning how to make sure that the NABERS ratings themselves were robust and reliable, and coming up with that accredited assessor, the really strict rules and the really strict quality assurance, so that people could trust those ratings. In the first few years, there was a bit more, I guess, flexibility in the way that the rules worked, and that perhaps, stifled take-up to some extent as well. But once we got all that sorted out in the early 2000s, and we saw that massive and rapid take-up. And we're starting from that strong foundation now with the data centres. So I think that we'll see that it'll be more like the post-2004 take-up from that chart, where we had significant year-on-year growth, from today, effectively.
Any other thoughts on take-up from the panel?
Yeah, plus data centre operators have far more integrity than dodgy property developers. But it'll only take the first couple of people seeking to gain a competitive advantage using a NABERS rating, and then there'll be an avalanche. And the market is sophisticated and fairly mature in their due diligence around data centres and their understanding of concepts like PUE. So it's just a logical extension of the conversations people are having today. But if you look at the big end of town, the banks and things, they will just say it's part of their contracts. All of my contracts with federal government today have a clause in them that state as soon as NABERS comes along, you have to be on board. So it might not be mandatory, but if you want to do business with the best clients, then it certainly is mandatory. So I think it'll move along very, very quickly and support what Matthew says.
I think to add to that, what we're seeing, especially in the small data centre operators, where they're operating the facility for themselves, it's actually been the office rating scheme that's actually forced a lot of these people to reconsider having those data centres in the commercial office building in the first place. So trying to obtain a 4.5 or 5-star rating in their commercial office tower has actually created the impetus for some organisations to relocate their data centres potentially into a colo facility or into another building. So having a double whammy with respect to the office rating scheme as well as the data centre NABERS rating scheme, I think fundamentally I don't see too many in the short term looking at the data centre rating in a commercial office building. However, the office rating will pick that up. However, the colo providers and the managed service providers, I think, will absolutely be looking at market competitive ratings.
I certainly have a feeling when I think about the cost of compliance, my thoughts aren't about the cost of getting assessed so much as a lot of the guys in this room that might have very small closets with servers and and I wonder how they feel about the expert panel having a lot of colo providers who obviously have better PUE. Is there a deliberate strategy here to drive data centres out of office buildings and out of back closets and into dedicated facilities?
Well, I could answer that from government's point of view to say no, there's not. I mean, effectively, apart from our, procurement standards, certainly from a NABERS point of view, there's not any prejudgment as to what's more efficient and what's not more efficient in terms of the design or the location of facilities. All we're trying to do is to create an understanding of the relative efficiency so that you can make an informed choice. We're not saying this one's better than that one necessarily, but what we are saying is, what we're giving the market the ability to say is this one's more energy efficient than that one is. There'll be all sorts of decisions as to whether you do a co-location or move into a dedicated facility, and this will be one factor.
If I may take the liberty and answer on behalf of Her Majesty's Australian Government, there's a push to get facilities out of office buildings and into purpose-built data centres. By 2015, all Commonwealth agencies have to be in 4.5 star office buildings, and it's very difficult to achieve with an ageing sort of server room supported by office air conditioning in the basement. So that's coming, and the average PUE across government is fairly modest, 1.9 that they want to achieve across all of their facilities, including server rooms. So, and as leases come up for renewal, it's not a possibility to continue server rooms in office buildings. So if you take the lead of the Commonwealth and you ask yourself why are they doing that, it's energy efficiency, it's reliability, the performance, and a lot of the challenges that they've faced over the last 20 years have arisen because they haven't controlled the spread and the growth in data centres. And the vast majority of the 280 data centres that Dan mentioned yesterday from Defence, they're closets and server rooms. They're not actually purpose-built facilities, and it's very difficult to measure and maintain reliability across such a distributed footprint, and very expensive too.
There is a threshold in size where this kicks in, so not all comms cupboards are going to necessarily be scoped, but I think there is a definite accountability that has to be had here, and I've seen behaviours in large buildings. We're in a lot of large buildings. We have IT in those buildings, and the whole building has been structured around, especially the more efficient ones, just delivering for the human load. And when you put a data centre in there with 60 times the energy footprint of the office area, you're just sucking resources out of that building like you wouldn't go on. We bought one company in Melbourne in a 5-star building. They wanted to put our rent up by $4 a square metre per month because I needed one more crack unit in that server room. So we redesigned the server room and rebalanced the room and got it working at a higher level without that. But to get an extra bore of chilled water off the roof was going to be incredibly expensive for us, and the penalties are quite high. So the building owners are well aware of what you're costing them in resources and overhead. A lot of the buildings now shut down their HVAC at night, and if you've got a server room in there, they're probably running it for you. So they're not going to help you either, to be honest. They're going to want you out. So I think this is a market trend. We've felt the pressure. We have even had building owners come back to us talking about our computer rooms, and they've closely monitored well above what NABERS requires of them, what is actually happening in that building and how much we're drawing for our server rooms and computer rooms. So real life experience is it was coming anyway.
We're actually seeing it with some landlords right now in Brisbane where you just are not allowed to put a computer room into the building. As soon as you suggest it, say goodbye to the lease, you probably won't get renewed, or you'll be asked to leave at the end of the lease term. The other side of it, with some of the ICT master planning we're doing for cities, and Greater Springfield's a great example, whenever there's a 4.5-star rated building constructed, as much as possible we try and ensure that no computer rooms effectively go into those buildings. So we're starting to look at it at a much broader level, not just at the individual office, but at a whole precinct or city level, where as much as possible we're trying to consolidate that IT infrastructure into a dedicated data centre infrastructure point or data centre location.
One of the other issues is no one's really had visibility on the cost of operation of one of these little rooms, because you might have a room of 5 or 10 square metres, you might have 1, 2, 3, 5 racks, whatever the case may be, and it's just a room in the corner. There's no separate sub-metering, and no one knows how much it costs to operate. So therefore it's a hidden cost in the overall cost of the building, and there's an old saying that says you can't manage what you don't know. But what will happen is with NABERS, and as we move forward with this and the cost of electricity continues to skyrocket, more and more people will start measuring these things, and once they realise that these things are costing an absolute fortune to run, they're going to make decisions and say, okay, it's time to move out, we'll relocate to another building or move into a colo facility, and we'll save 90% of our energy compared to the old way of doing things.
I'm conscious that some of you may have some of your own questions. I've got a long list still to come, but I'd like to throw open any opportunity for you guys to start asking questions. And if you don't, I'll, thought as much.
Hello. For a long time, I've believed that the road to efficiency from a PUE perspective is, number one, the colos build efficient space, and number two, they somehow trying to figure out how to mandate how those customers use that space. The problem is number two has been very difficult to achieve. What I see here is that for the colos to achieve the best NABERS rating they can get, they're going to have to think about mandating how the space is used, because I'm heavily involved in airflow management, cooling systems, and the reality is you can take a cooling system, best in class of 1.1, PPUE, and it'll have a 1.3 PPUE if the airflow is not managed in the room. So I'm wondering what the panel thinks about what's going to happen with that, because it's a very interesting shift in the market. Because the people that own the colos are now going to rely on their customers for that NABERS rating to be achieved.
Wonderful point, Tony. We had the gentleman from Facebook here yesterday, and if I could buy 1 million servers that were custom made for my facility and build a data centre around them, then that would be a wonderful, wonderful outcome. And you could get amazing PUEs like Facebook has achieved. They're also running, one application, which a lot of our enterprise clients certainly aren't. The challenge that I've been presented by the federal government, because of Commonwealth procurement rules now, not guidelines, is I have to accommodate any piece of equipment that they throw at me. Now, that has enormous challenges in terms of having low efficiency, but the clients are also getting more intelligent because they see, okay, they have to actually help me to help themselves in terms of hitting the Commonwealth's overall goals of minimum PUEs by 2015. So all my clients are really, really switched on through education and working together around deployment methodologies, containment, airflow, cabling, discipline around cabling, and all of those items to maximise the performance of the efficiency of the facility, which is my facility, but it's also our facility in terms of meeting the PUE outcomes. As this tool will indicate, 30 or 40% of the performance of the data centre is going to rely on the client's behaviour and deployment strategies within that technical space. So I couldn't agree with you more. It's about working together, and if the organisations aren't interested, or you don't have that control written into your contracts and whatnot, or you don't have working groups and technical working groups within your co-location facility to help your clients, then you're going to struggle to be really world-class in terms of efficiency. But make no mistake, a co-location, PUE and performance and whatnot, it's difficult to compare and contrast those to Amazon, Google, etc. Because if I had single-corded devices with little redundancy and I had my resilience built in through the application layer rather than in the infrastructure, then the world would be a wonderful place. And, you know, don't even get me started about, you know, what type of infrastructure, what they're actually using it for, and you know, as all the dead servers sitting there, not necessarily, they're contributing to my PUE, but they're not actually contributing to any business outcome necessarily. And, you know, sometimes I've seen servers that take 6 months from the time they're plugged in till the time they're actually in production. That's a long time, but it's good for my PUE, but it's not, is that really good, you know? So, very good question, Tony.
I think the other thing to add to that is at some point it has to come back into potentially the people sitting in the room around the procurement process they're putting in place. Even now we're still seeing some infrastructure that's got built into it bad cooling design. You know, we have front to side, you know, bottom to top, when a lot of new data centre designs don't support that sort of airflow model to actually achieve much better airflow across the whole facility. So unless the people in the room start forcing the vendors to actually comply with the airflow model that the data centre is actually employing, and, you know, front to back cooling is a great example, then those requirements and forcing it back into the tenant as they come into a colo facility gets difficult, and you end up in a situation where the anything comes applies. And as soon as that happens, you end up with a bad PUE across the whole facility, and particularly across the IT infrastructure. So that procurement process needs to be fixed, I believe, where the procurement teams are actually driving the decision at the procurement level to actually buy the right infrastructure in the first place to actually help with the IT efficiency model.
I think Mike gave an example earlier of how this has changed in the office market as well, that engagement between office owners and tenants and just not accepting inefficient designs, you know, making them change the way that they design their space to the point that they're not entering into lease renewals if they want to change beyond the design standards of the building. So, I mean, effectively, something like NABERS will help you set up systems so that you can talk with the people that are purchasing that space in a much more informed way and say, well, if you ask for this, it's going to have that impact, and so I'm not going to let you do it because you're also asking for a high NABERS rating.
The other impact that is not yet seen is going to be when any of these building owners or companies that have these rooms respond to tenders to government, state or federal. As was mentioned earlier, these tenders will start mentioning, even though it's not compulsory, they'll start mentioning and asking, what is your NABERS rating for data centre infrastructure and IT workload? And when you answer, well, we've got a cabinet here and we've got a 1-star rating. Oh, well, gee, that's good. That's going to get them a lot of business with government, isn't it? Not. So we're going to see a few interesting scenarios happen here, and that will drive a lot of market change.
Can we take some more questions?
Wasn't a small one. I do apologise here. Glenn, I mean, you mentioned earlier about lazy servers. I mean, this is, as a co-location provider, I think this is probably where I'm a little bit confused about this rating. Exactly how is this addressed? Because if it's a sum of clock speed versus with the sum of unformatted storage, there's no real metric in there for how that's actually being utilised. I mean, you could have lots and lots of storage that isn't formatted, that isn't being used, so you've got lots of lazy stuff there. And then on top of that, from I guess an IOPS versus capacity, so what are you doing on that disk? I mean, how are people doing high performance, lots and lots of processing on that disk versus, you know, people who are backing up on massive amounts of storage on arrays, or not even necessarily backing up, but active data? I mean, how is that going to effectively affect people, particularly like co-location providers, especially when it does make it very difficult for us to report and us go back to, I mean, I think if you go to the likes of Global Switch and say, can you sum up all of the storage on your floor space and sum up all of the processing power on your floor space, I mean, that would be a monumental task. Yeah, so that's...
Yeah, look, I know exactly where you're coming from. Behind closed doors, we had some quite raucous discussion on these items and how that would be collected and other things. And look, the point of the thing is you now have a measure that is saying clock speed and storage, and you ratio to the energy you're using. So the ratio isn't against those two factors, it's totaling and put against the energy. So now you've got an energy efficiency against the resources you're spending. What's different here? To improve your PUE, you went and beat the hell out of your facilities manager, right? To improve your NABERS rating, go to your technology team. So very different paradigm. The boot's on the other foot, and underutilised servers with massive arrays of cores and other things. Also, we looked into things like what would more efficient technologies do in these ratings. So we sort of test cased it and worked it through to try to work out, is this anti-virtualisation? Because virtualisation requires SANs, it requires more cores quite often, is a more power efficient way of working. Multi-cores do use less power than single cores. Are we encouraging the right behaviour? And at the end of the day, yes it does. It definitely drives consolidated high utilisation. Does it stop the use of SSDs? Which is can be a very positive technology if it's used correctly. No, it encourages it, because what you do is you drive down your energy footprint against your resource usage. And there'll be some backhanders here. You know, I think cloud providers are going to have a harder time for the first time ever, because they have to have elastic cloud. They have to have resources sitting there waiting for the customer.
How does it take into account when you open a building, it's empty, there's no infrastructure in it? So you're a colo provider, or you know, one service provider, just opened up a massive data centre, the place is empty. You've got no infrastructure in there. So does it take into account, you know, baselines? Does it have a base load before you start giving it a rating? Because, I mean, how can you give yourself a NABERS rating if the place is empty?
So you can't achieve NABERS without a historic track record. So day one, you can't get a NABERS rating. You can't walk in one day and 24 hours later come out with a NABERS rating.
So what's the time slice? Is it years, 6 months, 3 months?
So the sampling periods are 30 days, I think. Is that right, Steve?
12 months, previous 12 months.
And previous 12 months worth of grossed up power use. So it is not a spot measure, it is a trend.
Yeah, generally speaking, NABERS is about how much the operating facility is using. However, if you're designing a new facility, one of the things we have is that reverse calculator. So you could see, based on the design of the facility, you could work out what you're expecting the facility to look like. How much energy should you be targeting? So you can set it. You can basically set up front, well, this is where my cap is. If I want to achieve a 4-star rating, I can't use more than so many megawatt hours of electricity, and track that up to the point where you can actually do an official rating. But the official ratings are only about how much have you actually consumed, what's your actual impact on the environment, not what you're expecting to do.
I can't wait, Matthew, for the press releases we'll be getting from new data centre builds where they say an expected NABERS rating of X.
Yeah, well,
and I bet you
I can
computer
already
will
think of
report it
the
word for word.
announcement.
Well,
It's designed to achieve 6-star, not a problem.
design target 7-star.
Yeah.
But the Facebook gentleman yesterday, he had a PUE rating that because their data centre is not full. That PUE rating was achieved during commissioning with artificial load, you know, heat banks and things. So, you know, you can get a view on it.
Can I just, I mean, in the office building market, we did see a bit of that early on, but I think that market forces actually put pressure on people that are making ambit claims for things that they don't really have, and you'll soon find that the people that are actually doing the right thing put the hard word on those that aren't, and also us protecting our brand to make sure that anyone that's saying that they have a NABERS rating is actually using a real NABERS rating, not some fake thing that they've come up with. So, I mean, yeah, protecting the brand is our job, but it is also generally made easier by people basically saying, giving us the press clipping saying this doesn't actually exist.
And the public record's a wonderful thing, and if you make claims to your clients in 1-2 years' time, if you've said there's a PUE of whatever and it's twice that, you know, what does that mean? You know, what type of ramifications would that have? I certainly wouldn't like to have those conversations with my clients.
The other thing is, basically you'd need 12 months of actual usage, so you can't just do a heat load and throw in a whole lot of heaters in there for, you know, a few hours and get your number, because you need 12 months of numbers. So if your load, for example, at the start of that 12-month period was 20%, I probably wouldn't start from then. I'd be waiting until I get a more respectable load and then start the 12-month period.
The issue that creates, though, is back to your earlier statement about government procurement. So if a brand new data centre has been constructed, it doesn't have a NABERS rating, how do you comply with the government requirement to actually comply with the NABERS rating of, say, a 3-star or a 4-star with no history on a brand new facility? So how do you comply? There's
Good question.
major problem sitting there.
Well, so, I mean, again, that's about, there's a public calculator that will allow you to estimate what you're, using your own estimates of what you're expecting your energy consumption to be, you can basically get an understanding of how that will translate into a NABERS rating. But you're right, you'll only be able to formally comply after you've actually, constructed the facility and started using that energy.
Because it's an operation standard, it's not a design standard.
That's right.
If I could chuck a question in. As I'm sure most of my colleagues here did after we got back from the casino last night, I sort of trial ran a couple of hundred scenarios on the website here. And the conclusion I've reached is that it's not an energy efficiency rating, it's an emissions efficiency rating. And that's a very important distinction, particularly as it relates to the way in which you would go about configuring a facility for the maximum result. Improving your PUE is not the best way to get more stars, is my conclusion. In fact, it only inches you along. The best way to get more stars is by green power.
Well,
just go and sign an order.
There's an even easier one, just turn off all the redundancy. So, there's a certain point at which we've got to be careful we're not playing the game between trying to load up more CPU processing and storage into a facility and not consume as much power just by turning off redundancy. So the whole redundancy versus efficiency discussion will definitely come to the fore.
Oh, absolutely. And this, the Microsoft facilities I'm familiar with, and possibly even that Facebook one, they're tier 1. Much easier way to deliver efficiency. But yeah, just on this green power point, I think is crucial, because as anyone who operates a colo knows, this is basically going to be a huge cost straight back to customers. So because your PUE is only going to shift you half a star one way or the other in most circumstances, it really seems to me that it becomes a question around green power. You are actually able to have a fairly ordinary PUE, but if you're, driven off hydro or, got a massive amount of solar, you'll be 6-star.
Yeah, so the way that NABERS works, we actually disclose the ratings with and without green power. So effectively you get what's a greenhouse efficiency score, if you like. So what's your greenhouse impact? If you're purchasing green power to reduce your impact on the environment, that's a really great thing that we want to encourage. But we also will disclose how would the building have rated if you hadn't made that purchase? So what's the underlying energy efficiency of that building? So that when the market's when you're communicating with clients, or when someone's actually approaching you, the government or otherwise, saying, I want to achieve a 4.5-star standard, you may find they say, I want you to achieve 4.5 stars without using green power, because that will be easily disclosed between the two parties. And we know, the market's quite wise to that in the office building sector, to say, it's really great for our corporate sustainable responsibility to have a low greenhouse footprint, but from a cost point of view, we're much more interested in you achieving that through energy efficiency than by buying green power.
Any more questions?
Matthew, this is for you. I'm interested in how the scheme is going to be maintained. So obviously this is a relative system. It's against your peers.
Yeah.
So therefore I'm assuming we're not going to get more stars in the future like they do on refrigerators and things. It's going to continue to be normalised, right? But this is important because I'm interested in, one, what the expectation is going to be on continual and recertification in terms of timelines and releases, and has there been consideration to how that also might affect T's and C's and commercial relationships when they're signed up to a certain rating, and then you re-release a new benchmark standard that they've got to go against that might impact them, and of course the ongoing cost for that as well.
Sure. So as I mentioned, we've been running this scheme in the office building market for more than 10 years. We generally tend to try and keep the star ratings as stable as possible. As I mentioned earlier, a couple of years ago we effectively added a star rating scale onto the existing market, but the 1 to 5 star scale is largely unchanged in that time, effectively. We do that because we know that it really benefits the market to have a really stable understanding of what is 2.5 stars, and we can start to build up a picture of, well, I know that building achieved 4 stars, or I know that one achieved 3 stars, so you kind of get an understanding for what you have to do to get to those different star ratings. So not only do the star ratings themselves start being able to plot you against your peers, generally across the market we start finding out that, well, this sort of building will generally deliver that sort of result. So that sort of stability is quite helpful. Having said that, what we do want to make sure is that we continue to understand the market, and if people start getting 6 stars, or it's really easy to get a particular rating, then we don't want to leave it there so that everyone's just getting one number, and effectively the benchmark means nothing, and there's nothing to compare yourself against. So the idea of NABERS is to ensure that we do a regular review and a close consultation with industry to make sure that it is current and relevant, but at the same time, our underlying priority is to try and keep it as stable as possible to really get those deeper market benefits over time.
And understand that the midpoint is an average, right? So it's a program in Melbourne called 2020, Cities 2020, and one of their objectives was to have all of Melbourne CBD on 5-star buildings. I said, if 18% of the country's building stocks became 5 stars, you'd only be 4 stars, because the average would become so competitive that it would drive it down. So energy efficiency is a journey, it's not an achievement, and it needs to keep upping the bar. And that's what it's designed to do. And I think we all know that we'll be out of business if we do the same thing in 10 years' time as we do now. The internet in the next 5 years, according to the Melbourne Energy Institute, needs 30 times more power to actually drive it. It needs a nuclear power station every 3 months to actually keep the comms running. Now, what is that doing? They're pipes between our data centres. So what's the energy growth for data centres trajectory in the next few years? It's mammoth. And getting in front of it's better than being hit by a train.
I think we've only got time for one more question, unfortunately, and then we will have to take the rest of them offline.
This is probably a question for Matt to start with, and maybe some of the closed-door discussions we'd like some insight into. Matt, you talked about the storage measure as the IT efficiency, and you talked about storage and tape. And in the rules, it talks about qualifying storage device. I'm just interested to understand better what that actually is. So if you've got racks and racks of tapes sitting on the floor doing nothing, I assume that's not counted. But what is in and out, and that's a complex problem, I guess.
I might have to defer to my colleagues here. I don't know that level of detail.
We debated about tapes for a while because there's arguments about the green technology and all that sort of thing because they don't draw power, right? And how do you create a behaviour that's positive towards the right technology as well? Effectively, because they're lower energy, they're effectively the energy of the room is being monitored. Something that's passive and not using anything might actually drive people back to tape in some ways for deep archive, or certainly automated tape libraries might get a second wind out of it, because there is a part there. So if you can reduce your energy footprint, you're better off than the NABERS.